Why do we stay? It's a question that tends to surface in the quietest hours of the night. You're lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the breathing of a partner who now feels like a stranger. There's no fight, no dramatic moment, just the dull awareness that whatever once lived between you has been gone for a long time. You know this isn't happiness, you know the connection is broken, and yet, when morning comes, you get up, you make coffee, you step back into the routine and continue as if nothing is wrong. From the outside, your life looks stable, predictable, safe, and that's the paradox. Because stability is often mistaken for peace. In reality, it can be the most convincing disguise for quiet despair. Psychology tells us that divorce ranks among the most stressful events a person can endure, second only to the death of a spouse. But here's the uncomfortable truth. For many people, the fear of leaving is far more paralyzing than the pain of staying. So this isn't just a conversation about marriage. It's about the human mind under pressure. About why rational, capable people choose a familiar hell over an unknown future. About how fear can keep us living a life that looks intact, while slowly hollowing us out from the inside. At the core of this paralysis is not weakness, it's biology. Human beings are wired for connection long before we are wired for happiness. From an evolutionary perspective, being alone once meant being exposed, without protection, without resources, without a tribe. Isolation wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. And although the world has changed, your nervous system hasn't caught up. Psychologists sometimes call this attachment hunger, the deep instinctive need to stay bonded, even when the bond itself is painful. To the brain, a cold or emotionally barren relationship can still register as safer than no relationship at all. Familiar misery feels predictable. The unknown does not. This is why the idea of leaving triggers such a strong internal alarm. You're not just contemplating a breakup, you're stepping into uncertainty. Your brain immediately floods you with worst-case scenarios, empty rooms, unanswered messages, long weekends with no one to call. It magnifies the fear of loneliness while quietly minimizing the pain you already live with. This is the psychological trap. The mind begins to bargain. It's not that bad. Other people have it worse. At least I know what to expect. Predictability becomes a substitute for safety. And safety becomes more important than joy. But here's what most people don't realize. This fear isn't evidence that staying is right. It's evidence that your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protect you from uncertainty, even if that protection comes at the cost of your emotional life. Understanding this doesn't make the fear disappear, but it does change the story you tell yourself about why it's there. When people think about divorce, they usually imagine the loss of a partner. What they rarely talk about is the loss of a self. A long-term marriage doesn't just shape your daily routines, it reshapes your identity. Over time, I quietly becomes we. Decisions, plans, even small thoughts begin to orbit around that shared center. You are no longer just a person moving through the world. You are a husband, a wife, part of a defined structure that tells you who you are and where you belong. So when the marriage begins to die, it's not only the relationship that feels unstable, your sense of self does too. This is why the thought of leaving can feel like psychological freefall. You're not just asking, can I survive without this person? You're asking something far more unsettling. Who am I without this role? Who do you introduce yourself as? Who do you make decisions with? Who witnesses your life? Many people underestimate this identity shock. In the months following separation, often 3 to 6 months in, the nervous system enters a kind of withdrawal. The brain is no longer anchored to the familiar rhythms of us. Even if the marriage was lonely, it was structured. And structure, to the mind, feels like safety. Without it, people often experience disorientation. a strange emptiness, not just missing someone, but feeling unrecognizable to themselves. This is why some rush into new relationships or cling to the old one longer than they should, not out of love, but out of fear of becoming undefined. But here is a crucial distinction. Losing a role is not the same as losing your worth. Identity can collapse, but it can also be rebuilt more honestly, more deliberately. The fear you feel isn't proof that you can't survive without the marriage. It's proof of how deeply it shaped you, and that means something else is possible too. When people imagine loneliness, they picture an empty apartment, quiet rooms, no one to come home to, no voice calling from the other side of the door. That image alone is enough to keep many people from ever leaving an unhappy marriage. But loneliness doesn't always look like being alone. Often it looks like sitting across from someone at dinner with nothing left to say. It looks like sharing a bed without sharing a world. It's the slow realization that the person who knows your schedule, your habits, your history, no longer really knows you. This kind of loneliness is harder to name because, from the outside, it doesn't exist. You have a partner, you have a home, you have a life that appears complete. Yet emotionally, you are invisible. Your thoughts go unasked, your feelings go unheard. Your presence goes largely unnoticed, and that absence cuts deeper than solitude ever could. Solitude, at least, is honest. It doesn't pretend to be connection. It gives you space to hear your own thoughts again, to feel your own emotional rhythm without constantly bracing for indifference or disappointment. Loneliness inside a marriage, on the other hand, is disorienting. You're not just alone, you're alone with someone, and that contradiction slowly erodes your sense of reality. There is a particular pain in reaching for emotional closeness and finding nothing there, in learning over time to stop reaching at all. This is why so many people say they've never felt lonelier than when they were in the wrong relationship, because the sharpest loneliness isn't the absence of another person, it's the absence of being seen by the one who's supposed to see you most. I'm staying for the kids. It's one of the most common and most well-intentioned reasons people give for remaining in an unhappy marriage. The fear beneath it is real. You imagine broken routines, divided holidays, the look on your child's face when one parent moves out. The idea of causing that kind of pain can feel unbearable. But love, when guided only by fear, can quietly teach the wrong lessons. Children are far more perceptive than we give them credit for. They may not understand the details of adult relationships, but they are constantly absorbing emotional information. They feel the tension in the room. They notice the absence of warmth. They learn what love looks like, not from what parents say, but from what they live inside every day. In high conflict homes, the damage is obvious. But even in low conflict, emotionally distant marriages, something subtle happens. Children grow up normalizing emotional disconnection. They learn that love means endurance, silence, or self-sacrifice, that staying unhappy is a sign of maturity, that their own needs should be pushed aside to keep things stable. This doesn't mean divorce is painless. It isn't. But psychology has shown that a peaceful home with emotional clarity often does less long-term harm than a household where resentment quietly shapes the atmosphere. The harder question isn't just, will leaving hurt them? It's, what is this environment teaching them about relationships right now? Sometimes protecting children doesn't mean preserving a structure. It means modeling honesty, emotional health, and the courage to choose a life that isn't built on quiet suffering. Even when a marriage is quietly falling apart, leaving doesn't feel like a private decision. It feels public. We like to believe we live for ourselves, but human beings are deeply social creatures. Our sense of worth is shaped in part by how we are seen. And in many communities, marriage isn't just a relationship. It's a symbol of stability, of success, of having done life the right way. This is where shame enters. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, something is wrong with me. Divorce, in the eyes of others, can feel like a scarlet letter. You imagine the questions that won't be asked out loud, the subtle shift in how people look at you, the disappointment you fear in your parents' faces, the awkward silence among mutual friends who don't know where to place you anymore. So you perform, you maintain the image, family photos still get posted, holidays still happen. From the outside, everything appears intact, even admirable. But behind closed doors, you're living a life shaped more by perception than truth. In certain cultures, churches, and suburban communities, this pressure can be suffocating. Marriage becomes a measure of character, and leaving becomes a moral failure. You begin to prioritize being respected over being honest, seen as strong over being alive. But here's the question most people never ask themselves. Are you living your life or managing other people's comforts? The weight of those watching eyes can keep you in place for years. Yet those same people won't be there at 3 a.m, lying awake in your body, carrying the cost of a life that looks good but feels empty. Not all chains are emotional, some are financial. At the most basic level, human beings need safety, a place to live, stability, the ability to meet daily needs without constant fear. Psychology has long recognized this through Maslow's hierarchy. When survival feels threatened, everything else, including happiness, moves to the background. For many people, divorce doesn't feel like an emotional decision at all. It feels like financial freefall. The fears are concrete and relentless. Losing the house, paying 2 rents, legal fees, a lower standard of living. The quiet panic of asking, can I actually afford to leave? When one partner holds more economic power, this fear intensifies. Dependency creates imbalance, and imbalance breeds paralysis. This is especially common for women who stepped away from careers to raise children. Years of unpaid labour, emotional work, and caretaking rarely translate cleanly back into financial independence. The thought of re-entering the workforce later in life, often with outdated experience and diminished confidence, can feel overwhelming. So the mind makes a calculation. Emotional freedom is weighed against material security. And security usually wins. This isn't weakness, it's survival mode. The brain doesn't ask, will this make me fulfilled? It asks, will this keep me safe? Over time, people adapt to this trade. They learn to tolerate emotional emptiness in exchange for predictability. The marriage becomes less about love and more about logistics. A system that functions even if it suffocates. Understanding this matters because it reframes the choice. Many people aren't staying because they're afraid of being alone. They're staying because instability feels dangerous. And until that fear is acknowledged, without shame, it quietly continues to hold the relationship together, long after the emotional bond has disappeared. One of the most powerful forces keeping people in unhappy marriages isn't love, it's time. You look back at the years you've invested, the holidays, the sacrifices, the shared history, and the thought of walking away feels unbearable. 10 years, 15 years, sometimes more. Leaving now feels like admitting it was all a mistake, like everything you gave meant nothing. This is what psychology calls the sunk cost fallacy. When something has already cost us a great deal, we feel compelled to keep investing, even when it continues to hurt us. The mind clings to the past because the past is certain. The future isn't. So you tell yourself, maybe if I try harder, maybe things will change. Maybe one more year will make the difference. Over time, this mindset quietly erodes self-worth. Living in an unfulfilling relationship, especially one marked by criticism, neglect, or emotional dismissal, reshapes the way you see yourself. You start to doubt your desirability, your value. You ask questions you never would have asked before. Who would want me now? Is this the best I can hope for? This is the danger of staying too long. The longer the suffering lasts, the more it convinces you that suffering is what you deserve. But time already spent does not demand further sacrifice. Years invested are not a debt you owe the future. They are information. And sometimes, the most honest way to honour the time you gave is to stop giving it to something that is slowly diminishing you. For many people, the final barrier isn't fear or finances, it's guilt. You feel it when you imagine the pain your partner would experience if you left. Even if the love is gone, you can still see their vulnerability, their fear, their dependence on the life you've built together. And because you're empathetic, their suffering begins to outweigh your own. This is where empathy turns inward and becomes self-erasure. You don't want to be the villain in someone else's story. You don't want to be the one who gave up, who broke a promise, who caused pain. So you stay. Not because the relationship is healthy, but because leaving feels morally wrong. The mind enters a deadlock. Staying hurts. Leaving feels unforgivable. In this frozen state, many people begin to wait. They hope the other person will make the decision for them. That's something external. A fight, an affair, a crisis will justify the exit. Anything that would remove the burden of choice. But indecision has a cost. Living in emotional limbo drains energy, clarity, and self-trust. It seeps into your work, your parenting, your sense of vitality. Over time, the guilt of staying quietly becomes heavier than the guilt of leaving. Here is the truth most people are afraid to face. Guilt is not always a signal that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that you're choosing yourself after a long period of self-abandonment. Empathy doesn't require self-sacrifice, and you're not cruel for wanting a life that doesn't slowly disappear inside someone else's comfort. Leaving, or even seriously considering leaving, is often imagined as a dramatic leap into happiness. In reality, healing rarely begins that way. It starts quietly, with clarity, with the decision to stop pretending that endurance is the same as love. Rebuilding a life doesn't mean everything suddenly feels better. At first it can feel emptier, quieter, unfamiliar, but that silence is different from the one you knew before. It isn't filled with tension or self-betrayal. It's honest, and honesty is where healing actually begins. Healing looks like learning who you are without constantly negotiating your needs. It looks like small unglamorous steps, resting, rebuilding confidence, trusting your own perceptions again. It's not about replacing one relationship with another. It's about reconnecting with yourself before inviting anyone else in. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sounds like a calm, steady voice saying, "This life no longer fits me." And listening to that voice, even when you're afraid, is an act of profound self-respect. If this video helped you feel seen, you're not alone here. We talk about the quiet, complicated parts of the human heart on this channel. Consider subscribing if these conversations matter to you. And if something in this resonated, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to feel less alone. Thank you for watching.